Hi folks, my name is David. I'm the minister here at Erskine Parish Church. It's great to have you connecting with us, and I'm so glad you found our online resources. If you were to come into our physical church, you would get one of these welcome packs, so consider this your digital welcome. However you've joined us, we'd love it if you could like and subscribe to our platform. That allows you to continue to see when we're putting up new content. And also, if you'd like to get in touch and actually connect with us, you can email at epcnotices@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Been watching a series on the BBC called SAS Rogue Heroes. I love my military history, and Finley's actually watching it with me too, and follows the kind of special forces unit as they're formed in the kind of heat of World War II, and how they begin to, in many ways, turn the course of the war. But by definition, they are put into the most unenviable, dangerous situations, and what appears to be very often suicide missions and that's part of the appeal and the thrill of watching it, is we're watching something that, for many of us that would think, I wouldn't like to do normal soldiering, you're meant to feel even more, I wouldn't like to be thrust in behind enemy lines with that level of danger on every side. And there was an episode recently where the boys were looking to take Italy and start to push back the kind of Axis forces there. And they come to this little town called Termoli, and they can't understand why their normal rate of success isn't being replicated, because they're being bombarded on every side. And it turns out that as they try and take the town, there's a central, I can't remember, was it a clock or a church tower? But anyway, they've got a mole, they've been tipped, the Italian forces have been tipped off, and they've got somebody up there who's absolutely annihilating them with heavy gunfire. And what they managed to do is they figure that out, and they go up and they take the man out, and that changes their fortunes in that tower. And because they control it, it's safe. And I was reminded of that this week as I read this passage, because there's the central idea of the name of the Lord being a strong tower. But before we get to that, we have to accord for the fact that the world that we're in is dangerous, and not dangerous in the way you and I think. The Bible's got an incredible and ancient tradition of seeing words that we use as incredibly potent, and that being what in many ways can create a war zone that nobody needs any bullets or guns to add to. And so the question is then, how do we make our way through such a world? How do we make sure that we take part in it well? And what can we do, and how can we have any sense of protection? Because that verse about the name of the Lord being a strong tower, well, some of us know it as a chorus, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, and it doesn't look like it's got much immediate bearing on any of the verses around, which are all about the power of the tongue and speech. But I want to try and show to you that it does. So I want to look at how this chapter in Proverbs really elucidates words as being powerful, having a lot of potential, how it then speaks about words being weaponized, and then how people sometimes look for protection from that, and finally how God or Yahweh in the Old Testament, how he actually offers protection in such a world, and from the war zone of words, if you like. So let's first of all look at what the proverbial writer says about the inherent power of words. Verse 4. The words of the mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a rushing stream. We kind of lose the sense in English of the kind of terse nature of Hebrew poetry. What this is just a couple of images stitched together that the reader is then meant to sit with and reflect on. So when he says that the words of the mouth are deep waters, he's comparing it to a wadi or a river valley that you would get in the ancient Near East and or all over the Holy Land, where it's this kind of valley that goes through several hills, and it's got a deep plain that normally can be life-sustaining and life-giving, because man and beast is able to come and find water there. But if there are, in the heavy downpour seasons, it could become a flood, and because of the construction of the land around, it could become incredibly dangerous and treacherous to be there. And so it's got an ambiguous nature. It can be life-giving, but it can also be life-ending and destructive. And the Hebrew writer is using that image to get that sense across, that words are a bit like that. They can be life-giving or life-taking. But the fountain of wisdom is a rushing stream. So he's talking about everything he's saying in this chapter is more or less about words, and he's talking about the right use and the wise use of words and comparing it to a rushing stream. So for the original audience, they would have seen this as something like the spring of Gihon near Jerusalem, which was hugely relied on as a natural resource for living water that would have made a difference to so many people's lives. And he's saying, if you find the right way to use words and you give them out in proportion with that gift, then they become something that gives life to you and also to others. And that's the power of it. It's a bit like the raw materials we find in the world, where we can use some of the processes of nuclear fission in order to power things and to create energy, or we can wipe out entire cities and destroy people's lives with them. We have raw resources and materials in the world that can be used to make amazing buildings, to house people, or to create bombs that kill people. And words are in exactly that kind of ambiguity here, and that's the nature and reality of it. And he's giving a nod to the fact that we can use them rightly. So words are inherently powerful, but not so much unfortunately, but when you and I think about our lives for even a second, we know that we can use them as weapons. And this chapter sketches out almost caricatures, and some people will live up to being the caricature, and far be it from me in my position to ever say who they are. That's not my job. My job is to present the Word of God and hope that people can, if they don't find themselves wholly in any of these situations, that they at least are able to reflect on part of it and see, oh, okay, well, might not be the whole picture there, but maybe part of it. So the first kind of caricature of a person who uses words as a weapon is the fools, it says in this text. But see, when you go to the Hebrew, it's much more accurate to say a dimwit. I know that's not terribly kind, but the Bible's very realistic. It's not necessarily all placid. To get this in your head, I, since been down on the west coast of Scotland, having come down from the islands, I actually worked with people from the west coast of Scotland before I lived here. And they used to have this great phrase called heed the ball. Have you ever heard it? And I instinctively knew how to use heed the ball before I even knew what it meant. And it was when I was saying it to Victoria one day, I was saying, oh, such and such said they were a bit of a heed the ball. And she was like, what on earth does that mean? I was like, I don't know, I just know how to use it. And I know that it's accurate in this case. And she made me Google it. I was like, I Googled it. And the first thing that comes up when you Google that is a dim-witted irritant. And I thought, that's it. That's exactly it. And there's no more perfect expression in the Scottish or English language. And that's kind of who we have in verse 1 and 2. An unfriendly person, dimwit, pursues selfish ends, and against all sound judgment starts quarrels. Now, why dimwit is better than a fool is because they're not necessarily unintelligent or unskilled at absolutely everything in life. But in terms of social interactions, not particularly skilled. They pursue selfish ends. So one of the ways that they weaponize things is they will isolate themselves and push away anybody who would be able to bring any sense of correction or level-headedness, because all they want to do is complain and start quarrels with other people. And what they'll do is they'll make sure they don't have a good enough relationship with anyone around them who might be able to impede that a little bit. And they're, again, the Hebrew kind of uses this idea of somebody who is doggedly pursuing something as their life's goal and mission. And not only that, will they kind of isolate themselves, but they find no fools, verse 2, find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. And there's a tragic irony in this, because not only do they not want understanding, they want to show other people how knowledgeable and understanding they are. But when they try to do that, it's quite a sad thing, because all they're doing is kind of turning themselves inside out and showing how completely ignorant they are. They're actually incapable of covering over their ignorance because they just want to talk so much and show everyone what they know. And the tragic irony is that there's not really much there that they do know at all. Now, the Proverbs is really comprehensive because it kind of shows you not only what they're like, it's not just standing back and saying, this is what some people in life are like, and that might be warning enough in itself, but then it kind of says what the trajectory of a life like that is. So in verse 6, the lips of the, heed the ball, bring them strife, and their mouths invite a beating. So the difficulty is that this person is so unskilled in social interaction that they can't realize that a life of going around complaining about other people or bringing bits and pieces of information that they don't like to other people and hoping other people will agree with them, that doing that constantly is eventually going to make anyone with any sense go, I wonder if you're the problem, because you keep complaining about everybody else, and I wonder if that might be you. And so whether that's a metaphorical beating or not, it's sketching out the idea that that's not going to lead someone into healthy and fruitful relationships. That's not going to bring much favor or good reputation their way. But because they're dim-witted in the sense of doing life, they're not able to do the mental chess. Because what's a game of chess all about? You've got to be able to think 2, 3, maybe 4, 5 moves ahead. This person can't think past the next stupid thing that they want to say about somebody that'll hopefully stir up some conflict, because that's what they enjoy. So they're not able to think ahead, going, well, if you're a young boy, maybe in a kind of fairly rough context, yeah, that probably will invite a beating. If you're older and like in the context that you and I kind of spend most of our time in, it's probably just going to lead to an absolutely trashed reputation and a bit of loneliness and a lack of good connection because of the propensity towards being untrustworthy. And then the ultimate kind of spiritual tragedy of that is, if you go to verse 20, from the fruit of their mouth a person's stomach is filled, with the harvest of their lips they are satisfied. That's a further reflection on the fact that from the point of view of God, whatever we spend our time speaking out, that's actually who we are, and that's increasingly who we become. So you are, in many ways, your words, your thoughts and your actions, but in a real way your words, because your words go out and they not only affect you, other people, but they also affect you. They over time, we're thinking about this last week with C.S. Lewis, that everybody with every decision that they make is turning more and more gradually either into a heavenly person or a hellish person, and their words are a massive part of that because they continue to draw us towards the goal of who we are actually becoming, and our words show who we want to become, because whether we discipline them or not, the way we use them is increasingly going to fill us up. We all end up eating our own words in one way or another, for good or for ill, and so it's the meat and drink to us. It's inseparable from who we are. There's no more stupid an idea that we can teach children than that words are just words. Words are the essence of someone, because why else would you say them? Why would you communicate anything? God created the world by the power of his words. We of all people should get the immense power of them, and the sense in which there's an idea that a caricature that God is really capricious and cruel and will sends people either to heaven or to hell. And I like, again, the way C.S. Lewis puts that. On the last day, C.S. Lewis says that God just says to people, there's either the people that have said to God, thy will be done, because they engaged in a relationship with God and wanted to become more like God through Jesus, and the people to whom God says, thy will be done. And our words are part of that. Whatever you wanted to keep living your life and whatever you wanted to keep becoming, then God eventually fulfills that. There's a kind of a sense in which it continues to take us toward our trajectory and our destiny. And so that's how we can weaponize words in a way which doesn't make our own lives or the world or anything better. And then our reaction can be, when you think about that, and that's just one example of the way words are unwisely used and the way they fill our world and can make the world a dangerous and feel like an unsafe place. And then I think what's interesting about this is it goes it anticipates the way human beings are going to try and deal with that and try and find a sense of safety and security. In verse 11, it says, "The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale." This is one way that some people think, I'm going to escape the chaos and the uncertainty and the fear of being in this world and the fact that people could try and tarnish me with their words, is so maybe I'll build up a lot of wealth. And Proverbs gets to the fallacy of that in a really unique way by saying that they imagine it a wall too high to scale. What's the implication of that? That regardless of how stupendously we acquire wealth, it's not going to make us necessarily wise with words. It's not going to necessarily insulate us from the wealth being taken away and words being used against us, maybe words used against us to take our wealth away. You know, some very wealthy people have been undone by stories that were written about them, true or not. But it's not actually a fortified city. It's a figment of one's imagination. And quite often that's what, if people are trusting in their riches, that's what it looks like. They believe in it. It's an article of faith. They have imagined that it insulates them from the worst aspects of living in this corrupted and fallen world. And it doesn't, because it says it's an illusion. And then verse 12, "Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor." And this is all thinking about the same thing. How do I protect myself? How do I get away from all the minefields and the pitfalls and the firing arrows? One way is to maybe think, well, I'm above it all. I'm a bit cleverer and I'm a bit better than everyone else, but wiser with my words than everyone else without actually doing the work to become wiser. And it's kind of another figment of imagination that is a fig leaf. It doesn't actually offer any sustained or lasting protection. It particularly bypasses, because all of this starts with humility, so it bypasses the humility. And you're come across that where someone is obviously, there's a kind of healthy self-talk we can do where we can encourage our hearts a bit, but there's a really destructive a really destructive inverse of that, where someone just puffs themselves up and says affirmations to themselves to say that they're brilliant and they're a bit better than everyone else. So the leader of the free world right now would probably be a good example of that. And it's low-hanging fruit, but it is a good example of someone who is a bit convinced of their own brilliance, and it's not clear that the humility was ever there in order to learn and become discerning and to speak wise words. And so just having the pride to tell ourselves we're better than it all and above the fray is not the answer too. And then we get to the sort of the answer, the protection afforded through God in verse 10. "The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe." The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The tower that we're all looking for in this life isn't there in the name of God. In the ancient world, someone's name was a stand-in for their character, their whole being. It was something that you could take to the bank. If it was a good name, it meant that there were good things standing behind it, that they were genuine and had integrity if they had a good name. And none more so than the Lord, who has been good to his people and good to Israel. It asks people to test God and see whether he will afford them the protection that they're looking for. It asks people to actually find their identity and their security in the name of God rather than in anything else. And that's easier said than done, because I think we all find our identity in bits and pieces of things that we tell ourselves, or perhaps parts of our past, or things maybe other people have said to us, and then draw some security from that. Probably not problematic in and of itself, but God is here offering the bulwark that will withstand any assault. If you think about these boys in the war zone in Termoli, God is here saying, if you want a way that'll protect you from any onslaught, trust in my name. And here's why. Because that gives you something that nobody else can take away with their words. Nobody's words, however ill-informed, stupid, or unkind or vindictive, if you trust in the Lord with all your heart, nobody's able to take that down. That is somewhere where you can be safe. And then you can use, I think I mentioned last week as well, Mel Robbins, the speaker and writer, who's got the idea and the theory of let them. And that's so powerful, because I listened to it and I haven't stopped thinking about it, because I think it goes over really ancient wisdom that you find in biblical Christianity that says, you know what, might not be the worst thing in the world to just let people have their day and say what they will and do what they will, because ultimately if you trust in God, that is your founding identity, and you trust him to vindicate you at the right and proper time. You trust him because you let people be known by their own words and actions, and even if it's not immediately clear, you, a bit like the dimwit, you allow it to eventually establish a pattern and it'll be okay. Maybe that means sometimes being quiet, and Proverbs and wisdom is tricky and ambiguous, because sometimes it's a time to speak and sometimes it's a time to be quiet, but there is, for a lot of us, a lot of power to be found in seeing the name of God as a tower that we are fortified and that we trust in, and we allow the chaos and the madness to go on around us with words, and let people say what they will and fire the arrows that they will, because we've run into it and we are safe. And there's a knowledge of being safe with God that does, what does Paul say? The peace of God surpasses all human and earthly understanding. And that's what it's talking about. But then there are benefits that come from that trust in God as well that work further downfield. And in verse 13, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. I think by definition people who trust in the name and the word of God, it should make us better listeners. Because so much of folly with speech and words comes through a lack of listening. I learned a lot when Aileen and the others were setting up the listening service, because I did some of the introductory stuff, and I think we are all worse listeners than we think we are. That's what it showed me anyway. Particularly if you ask Victoria, she will say I'm the worst listener. But it's something we can all gradually get better at. But at the most consequential level, it's something that when we're very good at, we can actually make the world a better place. We're better at listening and waiting to speak, and we get that from exposure to God, to God's character and nature, from that sense of security in God. Because here's my experience, that I've often found that people who either talk very loudly or overmuch or are incessant with their words and cannot listen and do not listen, they're usually driven by a pretty deep motive of fear and insecurity. And they're worried that people will not think that they know very much or whatever in a situation. But if you know God and you know that the maker of heaven and earth has called you to himself and that he loves you, and you have that security, he can give you the security to just go, you know what, I'll just let people speak, or I'll let them speak, and maybe I don't need to speak. Maybe nobody needs to know how much I know about this. It can be a really freeing thing when somebody's motoring on about something that you know much more about, and you have the security and the freedom to go, not going to bother. Do you know? That security can come from knowing God and knowing that you already have the worth all the worth you will ever need to the maker of heaven and earth. And so you don't need to try and extract another inch of it in that situation. The heart of the discerning, verse 15, acquires knowledge. For the ears of the wise seek it out. I think a lot of the life of discipleship, the way we should characterize it, is growing in knowledge, in discernment, in understanding. And I think we're kind of missing a trick with discipleship not being more about that, because our world so badly needs that. I think the world I live in lacks more discernment than even 20 years ago. I think there's a lot in our world that is reducing our attention spans, our ability to pay deep attention to things. And I think the more that we can grow in this, and I think anything good comes from God. So if we're learning more listening, discerning, weighing things up, making wiser, sound judgments, getting more information and evidence before we make either assumptions or conclusions. All of that, I think, can be seen as this is part of how I show my Christianity. This is how I move forward, and I show that God is important to me, because He is the one who gifts us all wisdom. The New Testament, Elizabeth read for us, says, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God, and God will give it to you. But it's the seeking it and the wanting it. I think that is a really good advert for showing that God has done a work in our lives, and we're not content with ignorance or immaturity. We actually just want more, because we've experienced the God who offers it, and He wants to give it to us and let the world flourish through us using those gifts. It teaches us the value of relationships. It ends on, and I'll finish with this, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. I think part of that is words and speech, because it's possible to continue to bump along the world with all the fears and our reactions to those fears, if we imagine that everything is just a bit of a battle zone. But for me, Christianity is about experiencing profound relationship with God, and knowing a sense of security in our own hearts and His love that makes us more secure and less insecure. And then through that, and through the words that we use, and them being crafted well, and choosing when to speak and not to speak, and all of that, we actually become known as better friends. We're the opposite of the heed the ball. We're the one who people want to be around, and they would like us to have relationship with them, because they know that we're going to be loyal. They know that we're going to use our words well. And we know, like Jesus, we're going to want to speak the words of life and build them up. And I think that is open to every single one of us. It's simply about us taking up God's invitation to grow in wisdom, to ask Him for more, and ultimately to have Him transform our speech. May God bless His word to us. Amen.